What's the wildest thing your parents pressured you into believing? Can you imagine the absolute betrayal? Your own brother, your own flesh and blood, actively lying to protect your abusers, to keep you trapped in a nightmare. My brother did just that, and for years, I vowed I'd never look back, until 5 years later, he called me, sobbing, saying I was the only family he had left. What the hell happened next, right? Growing up, my parents had this twisted idea that privacy was a bad thing. Seriously, my mom would go through our rooms while we slept. If she found even a piece of homework I hadn't shown her, she'd wake me up and make me kneel on rice until morning. The grains dug into my skin, leaving these tiny, painful indentations that stayed for hours. Sometimes my knees would bleed, little red dots appearing on the white rice. The pain was sharp, constant, impossible to ignore. But my dad, he was even worse. He was the one who set the rules. He decided how long we'd kneel, if we could lock the bathroom door, even the clothes we wore, so he could see the work he did on us if we broke his rules. His face would turn this particular shade of angry red, veins bulging in his forehead as he screamed. The smell of his aftershave would fill my nostrils when he leaned in to yell, making my stomach churn with pure anxiety. I hated them both. I hated their rules. I tried to rebel in tiny ways. I'd hide small things under my mattress, notes from friends, a candy wrapper, anything that could just be mine. I'd whisper to myself in the bathroom mirror, just practicing the feeling of having thoughts that belonged only to me. The constant surveillance was suffocating. It felt like there wasn't enough air in that house for me to breathe. My brother, though? He was fully indoctrinated. He followed every single word they said, religiously. And not only that, he was dead set on making me follow the rules, too. His room was across from mine, and I'd often hear him moving around at night, probably organizing his perfectly displayed belongings that he never, ever tried to hide. If he ever accidentally read one of my texts, he'd sprint to our parents, snitching that I was keeping secrets. Then he'd stand there, watching with this sickening smirk as they laid hands on me. The satisfaction in his eyes? Unmistakable. Like he was getting a thrill from my suffering. He was so self-serving and selfish. He'd volunteer random confessions at dinner, acting all high and mighty. I got frustrated with my math homework today and thought about giving up. He'd announce proudly, as if admitting some terrible sin. The hardwood dining chair would creak under me as I shifted, knowing what was coming next. Our parents would praise him endlessly for being open. And you know what? It paid off for him. Over time, they started letting him do things they'd never allowed before. Suddenly, his curfew was pushed back hours. His room stopped getting searched daily. He'd strut around the house with this new confidence, shooting me knowing looks when our parents weren't watching. Me? The intensity of the mistreatment ramped up. If I came home from school and didn't detail every class within minutes, I'd get punished. Severely. The sound of my dad's belt sliding through the loops of his pants became the most terrifying noise in my world. Often, I'd wince in pain sitting down in class, lying to my teachers about why I was hurting. I fell during soccer practice, I'd say. Or I bumped into a table. The fluorescent classroom lights seemed to highlight my discomfort, making me feel exposed, even when no one was looking. Then it got even worse. My parents started letting my brother search my stuff, too. And he loved it. The way his fingers would rifle through my belongings, quick and invasive, turning everything upside down. I caught him grinning while tossing out my things multiple times, justifying it by saying, I never told them about this or that. The sound of my drawers being yanked open would sometimes wake me, and I'd lie perfectly still, pretending to be asleep while he ransacked my few possessions. Other times, when he was feeling really mean, he'd just make up a lie about a secret note he found or something. The carpet fibers would scratch against my face as I pressed my cheek to the floor, begging them to believe me that there was no note. When that happened, my parents would lock me out of my own room and make me sleep on the couch, but only after the wailings. The leather couch was cold and sticky against my skin, and the thin blanket did little against the living room's chill. I'd see my brother lingering in the hallway after my punishments, smirking like he was the king of the house. Sometimes he'd whisper things as he passed by, little comments meant only for my ears, That's what happens to liars. Or, you deserve worse. The hallway was always dimly lit, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for me like grasping fingers. What's truly sad is that it didn't matter what I did. I tried getting all A's. My backpack would be heavy with textbooks as I studied late, eyes burning from exhaustion. I'd clean the whole house every weekend. The smell of cleaning products would cling to my hands for days, my fingers raw from scrubbing. I'd offer to cook dinner, carefully measuring ingredients, terrified of making a mistake. But if I wasn't sharing every detail about my life, they looked at me like I was less. The disappointment in their eyes cut deeper than any physical punishment. Eventually, they even started giving me the silent treatment. They'd all eat dinner together, leaving me at the kitchen counter alone. The sound of their forks scraping against plates, their casual conversation, occasional laughter, it felt like a physical barrier between us. The counter was cold and hard, and my food always tasted like nothing as I ate in isolation, just a few feet away from what looked like a normal, happy family. One night, after a particularly brutal punishment, I was at my absolute lowest. My whole body ached, and the loneliness felt like a physical weight pressing down. The house was quiet, except for the clock ticking in the hallway. And that's how I made the biggest mistake of my life. I thought I could trust my brother. I was desperate for some kind of ally, so I told him how I felt. The words tumbled out of me in a hushed whisper as we stood in the darkened hallway, my voice breaking with emotion. For a moment, his face seemed to soften, and I felt a flicker of hope. Within an hour, my dad had me laying face down over his lap, getting the belt out. I remember holding the pillow in my mouth, biting it not to scream. The fabric tasted like dust and salt from previous tears. 1, 2, all the way up to 10. Each strike sent shockwaves of pain through my body, the leather making a sickening sound as it connected with my skin. That was my breaking point. This whole time, I had truly believed my brother was just complying out of fear. But no, he really believed everything they were teaching us. I don't think I ever felt worse than I did that night. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical pain ever could. After that, I just stopped fighting. I threw away my journals. The pages filled with my thoughts and feelings disappeared into the trash, taking pieces of me with them. I deleted all my old texts, never messaged anyone unless I absolutely had to. The screen of my phone became as empty as I felt inside. If I was forced to confess something, I just made stuff up. I thought about cheating on a test, I'd say. Or I lied about finishing my homework. The words felt hollow, but they seemed to satisfy my parents' need for control. However, there was still that little glimmer of resilience within me. A tiny flame that refused to be extinguished completely. I started writing small notes to myself on scraps of paper, hiding them in the lining of my mattress or taped under my desk drawer. Just little reminders that I was still me, that I still existed beyond their control. Stay strong, this won't last forever, remember who you are. The act of writing these tiny affirmations felt like breathing after being underwater too long. And, of course, that came back to bite me. My brother caught me writing one of those little notes, the one private thing I still did, and immediately sprinted to my parents. His footsteps pounded down the hallway like a countdown to my punishment. As expected, they absolutely lost it. My mom screamed that they were done. Her voice reached that high-pitched tone that made my ears ring. My dad got the belt again. The leather made that familiar slithering sound as he pulled it from his pants. My flip phone was smashed against the wall. The plastic cracked and scattered across the floor in tiny shards. I wasn't allowed to eat for 3 days. My stomach cramped and growled, a constant reminder of my punishment. In the aftermath, they even started following me around the house so I couldn't be alone. The constant footsteps behind me, the feeling of eyes watching my every move, it was maddening. They made me stand in the living room, confessing secrets 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. I'd stand on the scratchy carpet, legs trembling from exhaustion, reciting made-up transgressions while they sat on the couch, judging. And every single time, my brother was right there, smirking proudly, as if he was doing the right thing. The sunlight through the living room window would sometimes catch his face, highlighting the satisfaction in his expression. I remember he called me a liar during one of my confessions. The word hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. My parents didn't wail on me too hard that day, but that one little tell was the straw that broke the camel's back. Something inside me finally snapped, like a rubber band stretched too far. I finally decided to leave. The decision settled in my chest like a stone, heavy, but somehow comforting in its certainty. I walked into school the next day, and for the first time in my life, I told a teacher what was happening at home. The classroom was empty except for us. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, dust particles dancing in the beams. I was honest. I broke down. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam, years of pain and fear spilling onto the desk between us. She seemed absolutely horrified, her face paling as I spoke. Before I knew it, I was sitting in the counselor's office, waiting for my parents to arrive to discuss the matter. 20 minutes later, I heard them before I saw them. My mom's shrill voice echoed down the hallway, demanding to know what was going on. My brother was with them, too. Of course, he was. I could hear his footsteps, slightly quicker than my parents', eager to be part of whatever was happening. The door swung open, and my mom rushed in first, her face a mask of worry that I knew was fake. The cloying smell of her perfume filled the small office, overwhelming. She tried to hug me, but I flinched away. My body reacted before my mind could, shrinking back into the chair. The counselor noticed. I saw her eyes narrow slightly, making a mental note. My dad stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, his hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed, the picture of a concerned but composed parent. My brother lurked behind him, peering around with curious eyes. He was trying to look innocent, but I could see the calculation in his gaze. Miss Patel asked them to have a seat and explained that we needed to discuss some serious concerns. The chairs creaked as my parents sat down, all smiles and confusion. "What's this about?" my mom asked, her voice honey-sweet. My brother leaned against the wall, arms crossed. I couldn't look at any of them. Miss Patel began by telling them I had shared some very troubling information about punishment practices in our home that involved physical. She spoke clearly and professionally, her clipboard resting on her lap. My mom's face transformed instantly, claiming it was ridiculous, that they would never hurt me. Her voice rose in pitch, indignant and shocked. "We love our children. We would never harm them." When I whispered about the rice, my voice barely audible even to my own ears, my dad jumped in, suggesting there had been a misunderstanding and that I'd been having behavioral issues lately, making up stories for attention. His voice was calm and reasonable, the voice he used when talking to neighbors or teachers. "We're strict parents, yes, but we're not abusive," he insisted, shaking his head sadly. I spoke louder, telling them I had marks on my knees and back. My voice gained strength as I continued, fueled by the knowledge that someone was finally listening. Miss Patel confirmed the school nurse had documented these injuries. She flipped a page on her clipboard, reading from the nurse's report. My parents exchanged a quick glance before my dad leaned forward with that reasonable tone. "Kids get bruises all the time," he began, spreading his hands in a gesture of openness. "We're concerned about these stories." I interrupted him, mentioning I hadn't eaten in 3 days because I wrote a note to myself. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. The room went silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning and the ticking of the clock. My brother shifted uncomfortably. For once, he didn't look smug. He looked nervous. My mom claimed it was a complete lie and that we had dinner together just last night, looking to my brother for confirmation. Her eyes widened slightly, a silent command. He immediately backed her up, saying, "We did. Mom made lasagna." His voice was steady, practiced. They'd done this before, presenting a united front against me. I told Miss Patel about eating at the kitchen counter alone while they sat at the table, my hands twisted in my lap as I spoke, nails digging into my palms. They wouldn't talk to me. They acted like I wasn't even there. My dad's face hardened as he said this was getting out of hand and that they were taking me home now to sort out this misunderstanding as a family. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The word family sounded like a thread in his mouth. Miss Patel stood up and informed them that wouldn't be possible today, as she had already contacted Child Protective Services, who were sending someone over to speak with all of us. Her voice was firm, brooking no argument. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. The air felt suddenly thick and difficult to breathe. My mom's fake smile vanished completely. Her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing. My dad's jaw tightened in that way it did right before he reached for his belt. I instinctively pressed back further into my chair. He quietly insisted they were good parents who had done nothing wrong. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the anger simmering beneath. My brother pushed off from the wall, claiming I made stuff up all the time for attention, even lying about having a stomach ache the previous week to skip a math test. His words tumbled out quickly, desperate. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd never skipped a test in my life. Good grades were the only thing that sometimes kept me safe. The injustice of his lie made my chest ache. A knock at the door made everyone turn. The sound was sharp and official, cutting through the tension. A woman in a navy blazer stepped in, introducing herself as Marissa Wilson from CPS. Her shoes clicked as she entered, notebook already in hand. Behind her was a police officer named Officer Torres. His uniform rustled slightly as he positioned himself near the door, his badge catching the fluorescent light. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Blood rushed in my ears, nearly drowning out the voices around me. What followed was the most surreal hour of my life. My parents denied everything, painting a picture of a troubled teen making up stories for attention. They talked about how hard they tried, how much they sacrificed. The words flowed smoothly, well-rehearsed. My brother backed them up on everything, describing a perfect family life that had never existed. His hands gestured animatedly as he spoke, eyes wide with false sincerity. Ms. Wilson asked to speak with me alone in a smaller office. I showed her my knees, still raw and scabbed from the rice. The skin was red and pitted, tiny indentations marking where the grains had dug in. I showed her the marks on my back from the belt, purple and yellow bruises in various stages of healing, mapping out my punishment history. I told her about the confessions, the searches, the smashed phone, everything. The words poured out of me, and with each one, I felt a tiny bit lighter. When we returned, my parents were all smiles again, but their eyes burned with fury when they looked at me. I could feel the weight of their gaze, promising consequences. Ms. Wilson announced they would need to conduct a home visit, and that for tonight, they believed it was in my best interest to stay with an emergency foster family while they investigated further. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but kind. My dad stood up so fast his chair tipped over. He absolutely refused, insisting I was his child. The chair clattered against the floor, the sound echoing in the small office. "You can't take my child. This is outrageous." His face was turning that familiar shade of red. Officer Torres stepped forward, suggesting he cooperate fully, as this was a temporary measure. While the investigation proceeded, his hand rested casually near his belt, not threatening, but present. "Sir, please lower your voice and have a seat." My mom started crying, big theatrical sobs, begging them not to take her baby and insisting they were good parents, looking to my brother for support. Tears streaked her makeup, but her eyes remained dry and calculating. He nodded vigorously, insisting they were the best parents and that this wasn't fair. His voice cracked with what sounded like genuine emotion, but I knew better. I sat frozen, unable to believe what was happening. The voices around me seemed to fade in and out, like a radio with poor reception. After years of pain and fear, someone was finally listening to me. Someone was doing something. The realization was almost too big to comprehend. Miss Wilson helped me gather my things from my locker. The metal door clanged as I opened it, the sound echoing down the empty hallway. I didn't have much, just some textbooks and a jacket. My parents weren't allowed to approach me, but I could feel their eyes burning into my back as I walked down the hallway. The linoleum floor squeaked under my shoes with each step, marking my path away from them. My brother called out to me once, but Officer Torres stepped between us. "Stay back, please," he said firmly. My brother's face twisted with frustration, a glimpse of his true nature showing through the mask of concern. That night, I stayed with a foster family named the Jacksons. They had a quiet house with a guest room that had a lock on the door. The room was simple but clean, with pale blue walls and a window that overlooked a small garden. Mrs. Jackson told me I could use it if I wanted. "This is your space," she said gently. "No one will come in without your permission." I did. I locked the door and cried until I fell asleep. The pillow muffled my sobs, but they were tears of relief as much as pain. The next few days were a blur of interviews and doctor visits. CPS found the rice in our kitchen pantry. The bag was half empty, grain spilled in the corner of the cabinet. They found the belt. The leather was worn in the middle, evidence of frequent use. They interviewed neighbors who admitted they'd heard yelling and crying from our house, but never wanted to get involved in someone else's parenting. "We thought they were just strict," one neighbor said, looking ashamed. "My parents fought the investigation every step of the way." They hired a lawyer named Mr. Brennan, who specialized in family cases. His suit was expensive, his briefcase polished leather. They told everyone who would listen that I was troubled, that I was lying, that I was tearing the family apart for attention. Their voices followed me everywhere, even when they weren't physically present. Worst of all, they started showing up everywhere. When I went to school, my mom would be parked across the street. Her silver sedan would idle at the curb, windows tinted, but not enough to hide her watching face. When I left the Jacksons' house with Mrs. Jackson to go to the store, my dad would somehow be there, watching from his car. The feeling of being watched made my skin crawl, the back of my neck prickling with awareness. My brother started sending messages to the few school friends I had, telling them I was mentally ill and making everything up. "She's always been like this," he'd tell them. "She makes up stories for attention." Some friends believed him. They started avoiding me in the hallways, whispering behind their hands as I passed. One afternoon, I spotted my brother following me between classes. The crowded hallway parted slightly as he moved through it, his eyes fixed on me. When I confronted him, he just smiled, that same smirk I'd seen 1,000 times before, and whispered they would never believe me, that we were a good family and that I was the problem, and always had been. His breath smelled like mint gum as he leaned in close, words meant only for me. I called CPS that day and told them about the stalking. Miss Wilson helped me file for a restraining order. The courthouse was imposing, all marble and echoing hallways. The judge granted it, but that didn't stop them. They just got more careful, staying just far enough away to avoid getting in trouble. The legal document provided little actual protection, just a false sense of security that crumbled a little more each time I spotted them watching me. 3 weeks after I first spoke up, the court made its decision. The courtroom was stuffy and formal, wooden benches hard beneath me. My parents' rights were temporarily suspended pending completion of parenting classes and therapy. I would remain in foster care for at least 6 months. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack, making me jump slightly. As we left the courthouse, I saw them standing by their car. The parking lot was hot, asphalt radiating heat in the afternoon sun. My mom was crying again. My dad's face was stone. My brother stared at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion that made my skin crawl. His eyes narrowed as he watched me walk away. My dad called out that this wasn't over, that families belong together, and that they would get me back. His voice carried across the parking lot, making heads turn. I didn't respond. For the first time in years, I didn't have to. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Life with the Jacksons was strange at first. Their house was always quiet, no shouting or slamming doors. Mrs. Jackson, a kindergarten teacher with graying hair and gentle hands, always asked before entering my room. A soft knock, followed by, "May I come in?" The question still startled me every time. Mr. Jackson, a quiet man who worked from home, never raised his voice above a conversational tone. Even when he was frustrated, he spoke calmly and clearly. Their house had rules, too, but they were simple things like putting dishes in the dishwasher and letting them know if I'd be late coming home. The rules were written on a cheerful notepad stuck to the refrigerator, not enforced with threats or punishment. No confessions, no searches, no punishments. The absence of fear was disorienting, like stepping off a moving walkway onto solid ground. The first week, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd flinch when Mr. Jackson reached for something near me. The involuntary reaction would make him pause, his eyes sad but understanding. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain I heard someone searching through my things. The house creaked and settled in unfamiliar ways, each sound sending my heart racing. Mrs. Jackson noticed how I hoarded food in my room and told me gently that I was always welcome to anything in the kitchen, day or night. I didn't believe her at first. I continued to sneak granola bars and apples into my dresser drawer, hiding them under my clothes. She never searched, never commented when the fruit bowl emptied faster than it should have. Mrs. Jackson mentioned one evening, as we cleared the dinner table, that they had a therapy appointment for me the next day with Dr. Rivera, who specialized in helping kids who'd been through difficult situations. The plates clinked softly as we stacked them by the sink. My stomach clenched automatically as I nodded stiffly, already rehearsing acceptable answers in my head, safe answers, the kind that wouldn't get me punished. Dr. Rivera wasn't what I expected. She had bright purple glasses and a small office filled with fidget toys and art supplies. Plants lined her windowsill, green and thriving. She didn't make me talk about my parents right away. Instead, we just drew pictures and played with kinetic sand. The sand was cool and smooth between my fingers, forming and reforming into shapes without effort. By our third session, words started spilling out of me like water from a broken dam. I told her things I'd never told anyone, not even Miss Patel or Miss Wilson. The small office felt safe somehow, a bubble outside of normal time and space. She explained that I was experiencing hypervigilance after I told her about jumping at small noises and checking the locks on my bedroom door multiple times each night. She said it was my brain's way of trying to keep me safe, and that it made sense after what I'd been through. The validation felt like cool water on a burn. For so long, I'd been told my feelings were wrong, my perceptions were wrong, that I was wrong. Having someone tell me my reactions made sense was almost too much to process. I cried in her office that day, tears of relief more than sadness. School was harder. The hallways seemed too loud, too crowded, too unpredictable. News travels fast in high school, and suddenly everyone knew something was going on with my family. Some people avoided me like trauma was contagious. They'd cross to the other side of the hallway when they saw me coming. Others asked invasive questions that made my skin crawl. Did your dad really hit you? Why didn't you just run away? Their curiosity felt like another violation. A few were kind, especially my English teacher, Miss Hoffman, who let me eat lunch in her classroom when the cafeteria felt too overwhelming. The quiet room, with its bookshelves and posters, became a sanctuary. Take all the time you need, she'd say, grading papers at her desk while I ate my sandwich in silence. Then the notes started appearing in my locker. The metal door would swing open, and there it would be. Folded paper sitting on top of my books. The first one simply read liar. The word was written in all caps, pressed hard enough to leave indentations on the paper. I crumpled it up and threw it away, hands shaking. The trash can in the hallway was already overflowing, but I stuffed it down anyway. The next day, another appeared. They cry themselves to sleep because of you. I recognized my brother's handwriting immediately. The loops of his Y's and G's were distinctive, a pattern I'd seen on countless homework assignments and notes over the years. I reported the notes to Ms. Wilson, who contacted the school. They reviewed security footage, but couldn't catch who was leaving them. My brother was too smart for that. He'd always been good at causing pain without getting caught. One afternoon, I was walking home from school when a car slowed beside me. The engine hummed quietly as it matched my pace. My mother was driving, my brother in the passenger seat. Her window slid down with an electric whir. She called through the open window, her voice breaking as she begged me to come home, promising they had changed. "We miss you so much," she said, tears in her eyes. "Please, just talk to us." I kept walking, eyes forward, heart hammering in my chest. The sidewalk seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, each step taking enormous effort. My brother shouted that I was tearing the family apart and asked if that was what I wanted. His face was red with anger, the mask of concern completely gone. "You're destroying everything," he yelled, his voice cracking. I broke into a run, not stopping until I reached the Jacksons' house. My lungs burned, legs aching from the sprint. I burst through the door, gasping for breath, and told Mr. Jackson what happened. He immediately called Miss Wilson, who added the incident to her growing file and reminded my parents about the restraining order. "This is serious," she told them over the phone. "The next violation will have consequences." That night, I received dozens of text messages from unknown numbers. My phone buzzed constantly, lighting up with notification after notification. Some pretended to be concerned classmates asking if the rumors were true. "Hey, is everything okay? People are saying crazy stuff about your family." Others were more direct, saying my parents were devastated and questioning how I could make up such horrible lies. "Your mom cries every day because of you. How can you do this to your own family?" I knew my brother was behind it. He'd always been good at manipulating people, at creating a network of allies. The thought of him sitting somewhere, orchestrating this campaign against me, made me feel sick. I showed the messages to Mrs. Jackson, who helped me change my number the next day. The phone store was bright and sterile, salespeople moving efficiently to help us disconnect from the harassment. 2 months into my stay with the Jacksons, Miss Wilson stopped by with news that my parents had been attending their court-mandated parenting classes and therapy and were petitioning for supervised visitation. She sat at the kitchen table, a manila folder open in front of her. My hands went cold as I asked if I had to see them. The thought of being in the same room with them again made my stomach clench. She firmly assured me that the judge had made it clear that any contact must be voluntary on my part, and that if I wasn't ready, I didn't have to see them. Her voice was steady and certain. "This is about what's best for you, not them," she said, squeezing my hand briefly. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by guilt. The familiar voice in my head whispered that I was being selfish, that I should forgive them, that family was everything. Dr. Rivera assured me my feelings were normal, that healing wasn't linear, and that I didn't owe my abusers anything, not even forgiveness. "Healing is your journey," she told me during our next session. "You get to decide what that looks like and how fast or slow it goes." A week later, I was studying in the school library when my brother sat down across from me. The chair scraped loudly against the floor as he pulled it out. Several students looked up, then quickly away. He said conversationally that I looked terrible, while they were doing great, and that the house was so peaceful without me causing problems. His voice was casual, as if we were discussing the weather. I gathered my books, preparing to leave, to find a teacher, to report him for violating the restraining order. The textbooks felt heavy in my arms, my fingers clumsy with anxiety. He continued in a low voice that they wouldn't believe me forever, that eventually everyone would see what he'd always seen, that I was the problem, making up stories for attention. His eyes were cold, calculating. When I told him to leave me alone, my voice steadier than I felt, he leaned forward and asked, "What would you do?" "Tell on me again," saying he was just a concerned brother checking on his sibling and questioning who they would believe. His breath smelled like coffee as he leaned closer, invading my space. A library assistant approached our table, asking if everything was okay. Her sensible shoes squeaked slightly on the polished floor. My brother's face transformed instantly, concern replacing malice as he explained he was just trying to make sure I was doing all right, mentioning family stuff before saying he was leaving. The performance was flawless, practiced. He stood up, then paused to whisper that they were going to get me back, that they were just playing along with the therapy nonsense until the court gave them custody again, leaving the threat unfinished between us. The words hung in the air like poison as he walked away, shoulders relaxed, the picture of a normal teenager. I reported the encounter to the school and to Ms. Wilson. The school reviewed security footage and confirmed my brother had entered the building without permission or signing in. They increased security measures and made sure all staff knew he wasn't allowed near me. The security guard at the front entrance started checking IDs more carefully, his eyes scanning each face that passed. But the damage was done. His words echoed in my head at night as I tried to sleep. The ceiling of my room at the Jacksons' house became a movie screen for my worst fears. What if he was right? What if my parents were just pretending to change? What if I eventually had to go back? The questions circled like vultures, picking at my newfound sense of safety. Dr. Rivera helped me work through these fears in our sessions, explaining that my brother was trying to control me through fear, a common tactic of abusers and their enablers. He's trying to pull you back into their reality, she explained, because your freedom threatens the system they've built. When I asked if they would ever stop, if I would spend my whole life looking over my shoulder, Dr. Rivera leaned forward and acknowledged it was a valid fear, but reminded me I had options now that I didn't have before. That I had support and people who believed me. She emphasized I wasn't alone anymore. Her office felt safe, a bubble where truth was valued and protected. I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. The Jacksons' home, with its quiet routines and respect for boundaries, felt like proof that different kinds of families existed. Other days, the old fear crept back in, whispering that this was all temporary, that I'd eventually end up back in that house with the rice and the belt and the confessions. The fear would tighten around my chest like a vice, making it hard to breathe. 3 months after I'd been placed with the Jacksons, my parents escalated their campaign. They started attending school events like basketball games and choir concerts, anything open to the public where they might catch a glimpse of me. The gymnasium lights would glint off my mother's earrings as she sat in the bleachers, eyes scanning the crowd for me. They always stayed just far enough away to avoid violating the restraining order, but close enough that I knew they were there. Their presence cast a shadow over events that should have been enjoyable. They also began a whisper campaign in the community. Parents of my classmates would approach me in grocery stores or at school functions, telling me how my parents were such good people, how they were praying for our family to be reunited, how children sometimes misinterpret strict parenting as abuse. They only want what's best for you, one mother told me as I stood frozen in the cereal aisle, a shopping cart a flimsy barrier between us. My brother was more direct. Despite the restraining order, he found ways to make his presence known. More notes appeared in my locker. Anonymous social media accounts sent me messages ranging from guilt trips to veiled threats. You're breaking Mom's heart. Dad's not sleeping because of you. This won't last forever. Each message was designed to pull me back, to make me doubt my decision to speak up. Rumors spread through school that I was mentally unstable, that I'd made everything up for attention. Some students who had never even spoken to me before suddenly had stories about my weird behavior, or lies I'd supposedly told. The whispers followed me through hallways, cafeterias, classrooms. Some days it was hard to remember what was real and what wasn't. One afternoon, I came home from school to find Mrs. Jackson looking worried. The lines around her eyes were deeper than usual. Her smile strained. She sat me down at the kitchen table and gently informed me that my parents had filed a formal petition for reunification, claiming they'd completed all court requirements and that they'd changed. The wooden table felt solid under my hands as I gripped the edge. My stomach dropped as I asked if I had to go back. The words came out small and frightened. She assured me that I wouldn't have to go back right away, at least, explaining there would be a hearing where I'd have a chance to speak to the judge privately, and Miss Wilson would present her recommendations. Her hand covered mine briefly, warm and reassuring. That night, I barely slept. The thought of returning to that house, to those rules, to that life, was unbearable. I'd finally started to feel safe. I'd finally started to believe I deserved better. The moonlight cast strange shadows on my bedroom wall, shapes that seemed to move and shift as I stared at them through the long hours. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. Ms. Wilson helped me prepare, explaining what would happen and what questions the judge might ask. We sat in her office, going over the details again and again until I felt somewhat ready. Dr. Rivera worked with me on breathing techniques to stay calm while testifying. In through your nose for 4 counts, hold for 7, out through your mouth for 8, she instructed, demonstrating the rhythm. The day before the hearing, I found another note in my locker. See you at home soon. The paper trembled in my hand as I read it. My hands shook so badly I dropped my textbooks. The sound of them hitting the floor echoed in the hallway, drawing attention I didn't want. A passing teacher, Mr. Gaines, noticed and helped me gather them. His knees cracked as he knelt down, picking up scattered papers. When I showed him the note, his face darkened as he read it and suggested we go to the principal's office, calling it harassment. The principal called Miss Wilson, who added the note to her file. They reviewed security footage again, but found nothing. My brother had gotten better at avoiding the cameras. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I sat by my window, watching the street below, half expecting to see my parents' car idling at the curb. The neighborhood was quiet, most windows dark. Around 2 a.m., a car did drive by slowly, lights off. It circled the block twice before disappearing. I couldn't see who was driving, but my body knew. Every instinct screamed danger. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I told Mrs. Jackson in the morning. Her face paled as I described the car. She called the police, who took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do without proof it was my parents. They promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood. The officer's radio crackled as he made the request, codes I didn't understand passing back and forth. The day of the hearing arrived. I wore clothes Mrs. Jackson had bought me, a simple blouse and pants that fit properly, unlike the too small clothes my parents had kept me in. The fabric was soft against my skin, not scratchy or tight. My hands wouldn't stop trembling as we walked into the courthouse. The building seemed even more imposing than before, all cold stone and echoing hallways. My parents were already there, sitting with their lawyer. My mother had lost weight. Her cheekbones stood out sharply, making her eyes look larger. My father's hair had more gray than I remembered. They both looked up when I entered, their faces arranged in expressions of parental concern and love. The performance was flawless, practiced in front of mirrors and therapists. My brother sat behind them, his face unreadable. His eyes followed me as I walked to my seat, calculating and cold. I kept my gaze forward, focusing on the polished wood of the judge's bench. Judge Winters, an older woman, called the hearing to order. The sound of her gavel made me flinch slightly. My parents' lawyer went first, describing their extraordinary efforts to address the court's concerns. His voice was smooth and confident, hands gesturing expressively as he painted a picture of redemption. My parents had completed parenting classes with glowing reviews. They'd attended therapy consistently. They'd renovated my bedroom as a fresh start. The thought of them changing my personal space without me made my skin crawl. They'd even joined a church support group for parents. Their therapist testified that they had gained significant insight into appropriate boundaries and discipline techniques. Their parenting class instructor described them as eager to learn and implement positive parenting strategies. Each testimony built upon the last, creating an image of changed people that I didn't recognize or believe. Then it was our side's turn. Ms. Wilson presented her report, expressing concerns that the changes were superficial and motivated by the desire to regain custody rather than genuine understanding of the harm they'd caused. She detailed the continued harassment despite the restraining order. Her voice was clear and professional as she listed incident after incident. Dr. Rivera testified about my ongoing trauma symptoms and the negative impact that forced reunification could have on my mental health. She used terms like post-traumatic stress and attachment disruption, giving clinical weight to what I'd been experiencing. The school counselor described my improved academic performance and emotional state since being placed with the Jacksons. She's beginning to thrive, Ms. Patel said, in an environment where she feels safe. Throughout it all, I could feel my brother's eyes on me, cold and calculating. When it was his turn to speak, he painted a picture of a troubled sibling who'd always sought attention through lies and manipulation. He described our family life as normal and loving. He claimed I'd always been jealous of his relationship with our parents. His voice broke at just the right moments, eyes shining with what looked like genuine emotion. He concluded by saying they just wanted their family back together, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine emotion as he claimed, "They missed me so much. We just want our sister back," he said, a perfect tear sliding down his cheek. The performance was masterful. Finally, it was my turn. Judge Winters invited me to speak with her privately in her chambers. As I stood to follow her, My brother caught my eye and mouthed something that looked like liar. The silent accusation hung in the air between us as I walked away. In the judge's chambers, I told her everything. The room was smaller than the courtroom, more intimate. A family photo sat on her desk, children and grandchildren smiling in a park. About the rice and the belt. About the room searches and forced confessions. About eating alone at the kitchen counter while my family dined together. About the 3 days without food. About my brother's role in it all. The words came easier now. Practice making the telling less painful. When she asked how things had been with the Jacksons, I told her they were different, that they treated me like a person. Knocked before entering my room. Never searched my things. Didn't punish me for having private thoughts or feelings. I feel safe there, I said simply, the truth of it settling in my chest like a warm stone. When she asked what would happen if I had to go back to my parents' home, I couldn't stop the tears as I whispered, begging her not to send me back because they hadn't changed and were just pretending. They'll be worse, I said, voice breaking. They'll punish me for telling. They'll never let me be alone again. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Winters thanked everyone for their testimony and announced she would review all the evidence and issue her ruling the following week. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she spoke. As we left the courthouse, my mother called out that they loved me and just wanted me home. Her voice echoed in the marble hallway. I didn't look back. The sunlight outside was bright after the dim courthouse, momentarily blinding. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I jumped at every sound. The normal creaks and groans of the Jacksons' house seemed amplified, each one potentially threatening. I checked the locks repeatedly, tugging on doorknobs to make sure they were secure. I had nightmares about being dragged back to that house, about kneeling on rice while my brother watched, smirking. I'd wake gasping, sheets tangled around my legs like restraints. The night before the ruling, someone threw a rock through my bedroom window at the Jacksons' house with a note attached saying, "Traitors deserve what they get." The crash of breaking glass jolted me from sleep. Shards scattering across my bedroom floor, glittering in the moonlight. The police came, took photographs, dusted for fingerprints, but found nothing conclusive. Their radios crackled as they moved through the house, voices low and professional. Mr. and Mrs. Jackson moved me to their son's old room for the night, away from the broken window. The room smelled faintly of aftershave and old books, remnants of their grown son's presence. They took turns staying awake, watching the house. I heard them moving around downstairs, the occasional murmur of conversation. I lay in bed, listening to every creak and groan of the old house, wondering if this would be my last night of safety. The unfamiliar ceiling above me became a screen for my worst fears. The next morning, we returned to the courthouse. The building loomed against the sky, imposing and final. My parents and brother sat in the same places as before, but something was different. My mother's confident smile was gone. My father looked tense. My brother wouldn't meet my eyes. The air in the courtroom felt thick with anticipation. Judge Winters entered and called the court to order. The sound of her gavel made me flinch slightly. She shuffled some papers, then looked up with a serious expression, announcing that after careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, she had reached her decision regarding the petition for family reunification. The room fell completely silent. I could hear the ticking of the wall clock, marking each second of uncertainty. I held my breath, my future hanging on her next words. Mrs. Jackson's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. Judge Winters announced she was denying the petition for family reunification at this time, her voice firm and clear. The words took a moment to register. When they did, relief flooded through me so intensely, I felt lightheaded. My legs nearly gave out. Mrs. Jackson steadied me with a gentle hand on my shoulder. Across the courtroom, my mother's face crumpled. My father sat perfectly still. His jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. My brother's eyes widened in genuine shock. For once, he wasn't performing. The surprise was real. Judge Winters continued, extending my current placement for a minimum of 6 additional months, with mandatory continued therapy for all parties before reunification would be reconsidered. She detailed her reasoning, citing the continued harassment despite the restraining order, my ongoing trauma symptoms, and the suspicious incidents, including the rock through the window. Her voice was measured and authoritative as she listed each factor that had influenced her decision. As she spoke, my father's expression darkened. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Their lawyer leaned over, whispering something that made my father shake his head sharply. Judge Winters concluded by stating that the court takes the safety and well-being of children very seriously, and while reunification remains the goal, it would only happen when it truly served the best interests of the child. The gavel came down with finality, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged room. As we filed out of the courtroom, my parents' lawyer approached Ms. Wilson, speaking in hushed tones, their heads bent together, voices too low to hear. My brother pushed past them, making a beeline toward me. His face was flushed with anger, eyes narrowed. Mr. Jackson stepped between us immediately. His back was straight, shoulders set in a protective stance. My brother hissed that he just wanted to say congratulations and asked if I was happy destroying our family. The words were meant to wound, to plant seeds of guilt that would grow in the dark. Security escorted us to our car. The parking lot was busy, people coming and going from various court proceedings. As we pulled away, I spotted my parents standing on the courthouse steps, watching. My mother was still crying. My father had his arm around her, but his eyes followed our car with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Their figures grew smaller in the rear window as we drove away. The 6 months that followed were a strange mix of relief and constant vigilance. The harassment didn't stop, it just changed form. My parents began attending the same church as the Jacksons, sitting a few rows behind us every Sunday until the Jacksons switched to a different service time. The hymns and prayers were the same, but their presence turned the sanctuary into a battleground. They showed up at school functions, community events, anywhere they might legally catch a glimpse of me. Always careful to maintain the required distance, always watching. Their persistence was exhausting, a constant reminder that they hadn't given up. My brother was more direct. Despite the restraining order, he found ways to make his presence known. More notes appeared in my locker. Anonymous social media accounts sent me messages ranging from guilt trips to veiled threats. "You're breaking Mom's heart. Dad's not sleeping because of you. This won't last forever." Each message was designed to pull me back, to make me doubt my decision to speak up. Rumors spread through school that I was mentally unstable, that I'd made everything up for attention. Some students who had never even spoken to me before suddenly had stories about my weird behavior, or lies I'd supposedly told. The whispers followed me through hallways, cafeterias, classrooms. Some days it was hard to remember what was real and what wasn't. 3 months after the hearing, I was walking home from a study session at the library when a car pulled up beside me. The engine hummed quietly as it matched my pace on the empty street. My brother leaned out the passenger window, calling out that they would never stop, that I was still their kid, and that they would fight for me forever. His voice carried in the quiet neighborhood. I kept walking, eyes forward, fingers already dialing Ms. Wilson's number on my phone. The sidewalk seemed endless, each step taking enormous effort. He continued, the car creeping alongside me, saying, "I thought I'd won, but you haven't." This is just making them more determined, warning that when I came home, which he insisted would eventually happen, it would be so much worse. The threat hung in the air between us, heavy with promise. A police car turned onto the street, and the car with my brother sped away. The tires squealed slightly as they accelerated. I reported the incident to Miss Wilson, who added it to her growing file. The restraining order was extended, but we all knew it was just a piece of paper. It couldn't stop them if they were determined enough. Dr. Rivera explained during our next session that they were escalating because they were losing control. That every day I spent away from them, growing stronger and more independent, was a threat to the power they once had over me. "Your freedom is what scares them most," she said, leaning forward in her chair. When I asked if they would ever stop, if I would spend my whole life looking over my shoulder, Dr. Rivera acknowledged it was a valid fear, but reminded me I had options now that I didn't have before, that I had support and people who believed me. She emphasized I wasn't alone anymore. That night, I sat with the Jacksons at dinner, pushing food around my plate as I gathered courage to ask the question that had been haunting me. The dining room was warm and smelled of roast chicken and herbs. I finally blurted out, asking what would happen when I turned 18 and if I would have to go back. The question had been building inside me for weeks, growing larger with each passing day. Mrs. Jackson set down her fork and assured me I absolutely would not have to go back, that when I turned 18, I could make my own decisions about where I lived and who I had in my life. Her voice was firm and certain, brooking no argument. When I asked where I would go, my voice sounding small even to my own ears, Mr. Jackson cleared his throat and said they'd been meaning to talk to me about that, explaining that if I wanted, and only if you wanted, they'd like me to stay with them. Even after I turned 18, through college if that was my plan, or whatever came next for me. I stared at them, unable to process what I was hearing, asking if they really wanted me to stay. The question felt enormous, revealing all my insecurities in 5 simple words. Mrs. Jackson reached for my hand, assuring me that of course they did, that I was part of their family now. Her hand was warm and solid around mine, an anchor in a stormy sea. The word family hit me like a physical blow. For so long, family had meant fear and pain and walking on eggshells. The idea that it could mean safety and respect and genuine care was almost too much to comprehend. Tears filled my eyes as I looked at these 2 people who had shown me what family should actually feel like. The realization settled over me like a warm blanket. I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, I never would be. So, that's my story. It's been a long journey, and it's still ongoing, but I finally feel like I have a future that's truly mine. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever faced something like this, where you had to break away from what you thought was family to find your real one? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.